Hello, my loves. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Dustina. This is Spiritually Boujee Astrology, and we're going to take a look at the major astrological transits for November of 2025. Can you believe we're in November? It's a little hard to believe. It's a little hard to put that together, but it's the truth that we're here, and that means we're getting really, really, really close to 2026, which I've been ready for a very, 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 very long time. Let's get to it. But we're moving into a very interesting, to say the least, month. And I want to be very clear from the beginning. November is messy. It is messy. It is messy. It is messy. For some people, it's a necessary messy. It's almost like you got to pull the stuff out of the kitchen cabinets, everything out. We got to get it all there so that way we can reorganize and put everything into a new place because the plates didn't make sense over there. It'd be better if it's not in the pantry. It's better if we have this other setup. There's a necessity to the messy. Now, not everybody's going to feel like November is reorganizing the kitchen. I want to be clear about that right now. But it is a necessary messy. In last month's episode, I started out with talking about a little bit of numerology, and I want to do that again, but I'm not just going to talk about numerology in one aspect. I'm also going to include some of the tarot in what I define next. November is the 11th month, but the number 11 is a mastery number, and so few actually reach levels of mastery. So if you do 1 plus 1, it comes to the number 2. Now, the number 2 is the peacemaker. It is the diplomat. It is the balancing of energies. It's the yin and the yang in its perfection. There is the need to understand both sides. Gemini is the twin. There's equal pull and pull. There's certain amounts of forces. But if we think of the tarot, as much as we can look at the 2 of cups and partnership, which 2 is also a number of partnership, of union, there's also the choices, the balancing act of the 2 of coins, the need to make decisions of the 2 of swords, coming to a fork in the road and choosing a different path with the 2 of wands. The messiness brings choices this month. It brings direction this month. But not only that, it brings a lot of tests in the energy based off of the choices we've already made to ensure that we are prepared for the path that we have chosen. If November is more of a test for you to stay firm with your ideas, your solutions, your thoughts, your way of doing things, then you might be more in that level 11 and the mastery of being the teacher, the spiritual guide, the guru, leaning into your intuition, trusting your intuition, that everything up until this point was exactly what you needed to do to get to this point. And the messiness of this next few weeks is more to be the guide to help other people and be support. For other people, this month is about reaffirming your choices. Have you made good choices in the past? Will you be making good choices in the future? The choices you have made have put you in the position that you are in right now. Are you ready to accept accountability for these choices? Or do you need the universe to come through and go a couple more times, like the Three Stooges? Some of us going to get slapped around a little bit. It really depends on where we fall. Now, the key reason as to why I keep saying November is a very necessary messy is because from November 9th to November 29th, so you might as well just say the entire month, we're in a Mercury retrograde. Yay. Yeah. 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 There you go. Now, that Mercury retrograde will be split between 2 signs. It starts in Sagittarius. And the way that we start the month, Mercury is already in Sagittarius. But the second half and the more intense half will be Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. There's a lot to this Mercury retrograde. One, its placements, like I just covered, and two, the way it starts and ends, which adds extra layers that tells me that there is going to be lessons, that there is going to be shifts in responsibilities, there is going to be tests in the energy. For some people, it is going to be a push to force you to make different choices. And when all of your wounds and insecurities are getting triggered in different ways, it's again a mirror, a reflection of what is necessary in this moment for you. By the end of the month, going into December, we will be affirmed into new paths. Recovery in some ways, closing some things out in other ways before we go into the new year. Because the start of 2026 is a lot of new. And we only have an idea of so much of what that's going to be. But for some people, what you think it's going to be is going to be altered. Now, in some ways, it's just a little bit of altering. Like, you know, you're going to go to a new job, but you just don't know where that new job is going to go. You know that there's going to need to be care for grandma or grandpa, but you don't realize it's going to be you doing it. Or you have thought it's going to be you, and suddenly that responsibility is going to fall somewhere else, on someone else. You don't know that yet. But there's a major shift in the vibration. And the most interesting layer to get to this next part is the fact that this is really dominating Jupiter signs this month. The vibration, the energy, a lot of the transits, they are happening in Jupiter signs. Now, the reason that's important is because of the eclipse axis. Back in January, the North Node went into Pisces, the South Node went into Virgo. And our initial rounds of Pisces energy was not very stable. That Venus retrograde, that Mercury retrograde, we didn't have our second Pisces eclipse, the most important solidifying one, until September of this year. And that was roughly around September 7th. And since that eclipse, we haven't had a whole lot of Jupiterian things. We've had a little bit. In September, we also had Saturn retrograde back into Pisces, just letting us know, like a very slow just slide in going, hey, we need to focus over here. We still got stuff over here. We have unfinished business over here. That's going to be another thing we talk about a lot through the month of November. We got some unfinished business here. We're not done. And his entry was letting us know where, in certain ways, we're going to have our unfinished business, where certain things are unresolved, but he hasn't done anything with it yet. As we go through this month, more things happening in Jupiter signs will bring a lot more to the surface. This is a very key period of restructuring based off of what the North Node in Pisces represents for us, because we have not had a lot of transits focused on what we are going to have gains in. But for us to understand the gains, we need to do a lot of healing, because that's the one thing that Pisces represents first and foremost is healing. The necessary, messy energy, the unfinished business going forward is what choices we make in our healing process, how we overcome the wound. Now, over the month of October, we perfected our first Jupiter Chiron square, a very necessary energy that has made people aware of pain, seeing pain against masses of people, but also seeing and become aware of our own wounds and how to heal them. Some of us have been more that Jupiterian side. We have been the teacher. We have been that reflective energy. Our lessons have been pronounced. For other people, it is the Chiron vibration. This still hurts. This hasn't stopped. I'm still mad 20 years later, and I'm still mad. Okay. But 20 years later, you're letting something live in your head rent free. You're letting something control you as opposed to finally processing it. And whenever it comes to a lot of the vibration and the messiness of this month, there's a need to finally get into those wounds that have been holding us back. There is necessity in the messy. And not everybody is prepared for that mirror, for that accountability, for the reflection on your choices. But whether you like it or not, that's what we're stepping into. That's what we're going to be dealing with. That's what we need to understand, is what is necessary to heal a wound. For sometimes that's going to be the reflection. Sometimes that's going to be making a choice to go down a different path. So going back to the two, but thinking Two of Swords, Two of Wands, Two of Coins. Even the Two of Cups is a choice. You have to choose connection and partnership. But I'm not a fan of doing partnership in the Mercury retrograde. Just be fair. Some that's in temporary energy. So some of that's not going to stick. Just being real. If we're wanting to focus more on that connection and partnership, we need to look after the timeline after Mercury turns direct. So basically after November. There's been a lot of inflated egos. And I started talking about that in that very last episode of October. Like, there's a clear separation to path separation of some people being way too elevated, too high up, too far up, too focused on the big picture, that we're negating basic needs. We're negating the areas that need to be settled, handled. We're negating building a solid foundation. They just want to float. They just want to dream. We just want to be good and happy. We just want to do this up here, but so much of the fragile has been finding its way to the surface. For some of you, you've only been in the fragile. You've only been in the broken. And we're looking at the people that have been high up in the air. And for some of you, there is disdain, there is anger, there is frustration, and there's a large disconnect whenever it comes to the vibrations of November. Now, that's going to have a couple ways of manifesting. For some people, by the end of the month, we're going to be choosing our path, Two of Wands, making decisions, Two of Swords. And for some of you, you're not ready to make the decision at the beginning of the month. And you need the energetic wave and roller coaster to bring up your insecurities, to finally separate from something, to go down a different path. I've said this to a lot of people in recent weeks. Like, there's something about certain breakups that if we don't have the definer, normalized rule breaking situation, they didn't cheat, they didn't steal from you, they didn't lie to you, they didn't harm you, I'm saying it this way for the YouTube, Spotify gods, physical harm towards you or your kids or something like that. There isn't that click hard pressure. We can't find a reason to leave. We can't find a reason to separate. We can't justify it. So few people will justify something just based off of, like, I'm not feeling this. I don't like the vibe. I don't like the way this feels. I don't like the way we're talking to each other. I just don't like it. Something's not right. So many people will make the decision only based off of harm But then in the hindsight's 2020 is like, well, I guess there was red flags the whole time, and I just chose to ignore them. Stop ignoring the red flags. Red flags are enough. You don't need a definer to finally leave. It shouldn't require physical pain, emotional pain, mental damage. These are enough. And there's so many people that have to make a choice without the cultural norms. You can do this. You can separate, you can accomplish, you can connect, you can move, you can choose something different. And a lot of this month has to do with choices. Now, some of the choices that will present themselves, they are going to be a test. Will you make the change? So many of us need to make changes. We need to commit to something different. For some of you, it is someone different, because that's the bigger part of what the new normal is going to be. That's the new part of what we step into in our vibration. Wow, I screwed that up real good. In our vibration, in that energy, in that path, and in that new normal. There is something very specific for each of us as to what that's going to be, what that's going to look like, what that's going to feel like, where our vibration needs to go. There's a new long-term path, a new long-term energy, a new long-term vibration that needs to be focused on for so many people. And this month is going to test you, but it's going to test you in your decisions. It is going to test you in your choices. It is going to test you on your path. Have you learned the lesson, or are you going to repeat the pattern? If we repeat the pattern, we're putting ourselves into a deeper area of causing pain. One of the things Dusty started reminding everybody of in the month of October, for very good reason, was we have necessity of doing the opposite. Doing the opposite puts us in a better perspective to break the pattern. Because if we didn't start to find a way to break our pattern, the testing energy of November is going to be harder. It's going to hurt more. It's going to do more damage. It's going to rattle us a lot more. There's a reason why I said from the beginning, do the opposite of what you would normally do. That's still a matter of choice whenever we go through the month of November. We can finally break certain cycles, especially the cycles tied to our wounds, if we choose something different this go round. Separate, do not continue, and find a way to overcome where the wounds have been. Now, when you're in certain heated situations, that's going to be harder for a lot of people. But I am promising you, there is a necessity in breaking a long-term pattern of wounds by doing the opposite of what you've done in the past. If you are the controlling, I'm going to fix it for you, you cannot control and fix it for certain people. If you'd rather go run and hide and never talk about it again, you have to face it. You have to either take accountability or force accountability, depending on the situation. You have to do the opposite, because this will give so much in the long-term healing and align you more with the path of the eclipse axis, especially whenever it comes to the Pisces side. We're starting to actually tap into what Jupiter is going to give us. But before we can understand the gains, we've got to clean the house. We've got to deal with the messiness. We've got to reorganize the kitchen. Nah, we'll see. All right, let's get into the charts. Let's get into the transits. Let's get into November. And we're going to start this on November 2nd. Now, oh, Venus is still at the tail end of like the little quad that we've got going on. We got Mercury, Mars, the Sun, and then Venus. So a lot of the times I have said that Venus has been bringing some results. She's been bringing some outcomes. She's bringing solutions in a lot of ways. She's bringing a whole different outlook. And we start the month with Venus going through its opposition to Chiron and a square with Jupiter. So this is going to be on November 2nd. Now, one of these is happening roughly around 1:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. The other one's more in the evening time. I've got it written down at like 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. But it's a big part of the vibration of the day. Now, a lot of times, whenever Chiron is in any type of part of the transits, it can again be talking about what has wounded us, but it also can be, it talks about what the solution is. But with Jupiter being in this mix, a lot of this is giving extra layers to the things that we have already dealt with throughout the month of October while the Jupiter Chiron square was perfecting. But also, while we had, Mercury do this T square energy, the sun did this T square energy, we had a lot of vibration from before that brought awareness to things that triggered a lot of wounds and insecurity. And now Venus kind of coming through, her energy is lighter. It's a lot more helpful. And she is usually bringing solutions of like the appearance of something, the taste of something, what we need to change, where we need to turn something around, where we need to uplift something. Her vibration right here isn't necessarily negative for most people. Now, whenever it comes to that square with Jupiter, there can be a push or judgment to make physical changes, appearance changes. It doesn't always have to be physical as in your body. It can be physical as in like the world. We need some paint. Me and my construction terms. We need some paint. We need to upgrade. We need to renovate something. We need to change something. So the appearance can be like physical in that sense, but it can also have to do with like the judgment towards certain decisions or certain results, getting certain results. So there's a lot of things towards results, solutions, the appearance of things right here in this November timeframe. And again, these transits aren't an exact T squares, but it's going to be a big thing that encompasses November 2nd throughout the entire day. So just be aware of that. Okay. On the 3rd, I'm just going to bump this by day now. Mars is going to go through its trine to Neptune. Now, this is actually going to go more exact in the evening time, roughly around 10 p.m. Mars actions, desires, he's completing his transit through Scorpio, through its own home sign. Remember, Mars hadn't been in its own home sign in well over a year before it went into Scorpio. The last time we had a Mars rebirth was actually in Scorpio. So there were a lot of intentions that go all the way back to like November of 2023 that are now starting to see the light of day. They're now starting to manifest into something bigger. This is especially true for Scorpio risings and Aries risings. There's a very specific kind of intention of how we want to be seen, ways of making money, desires, actions, hidden desires that we have been trying to push into a new surface level. And whenever Mars goes through the trine with Neptune, this energy kind of feels like the actions that we take to inspire, going with more positive for just a second, Mars is trine to Neptune, the actions that we take to inspire, things that speak to our spirituality, that can speak to our growth. However, not everybody's going to be all sunshine and rainbows. Some of us are getting a sour bag of Skittles over here. And Mars is trine to Neptune is catching somebody in an act of lies, fraud, deception, seeing something that feels disruptive, that doesn't necessarily feel like it's based off something true. And it's a very interesting energy because some of us, it's been the lies, the fraud, the deception, and some of this action might be to overcome a past situation. For other people, Neptune can be about symptoms, and Mars's can be an action of how we overcome the symptom. the actions that we take to get through treatments. That can be another way that that part can come through. But there is a necessity to try to take an action that is not completely clear as to either how we got here, how this all happened, or what we do next. But considering both planets are at 29 degrees, they're at the end of their signs, there is some element of this that speaks to something that can come up that is also getting completed. And it's more going to be this Mars element, our desire, the action, the fighting, the tension, Mars, something being done for the last time, roughly between the 3rd and the 4th. So just kind of be aware of that. And that can also still feed into that solution energy with like Venus opposite Chiron, Venus squaring Jupiter, because that's still very active as we go into the 3rd. But there's some kind of like wave of energy that starts to set in from the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. That for a lot of people, it kind of feels connected, or it feels like we aren't getting any downtime while we ride this wave of disruption. And I'm going to continue this now into the 4th. At 7:02 a.m. Central Standard Time, got this now at 7:30, Mars enters Sagittarius. And as soon as Mars enters Sagittarius, it starts this opposition to Uranus. And this is intense. And this is interesting. And the most interesting to me is the fact that this will be the first opposition between Uranus and Mars in these signs. So whenever Uranus goes through a sign, it will have multiple conjunctions to Mars. I say multiple. It's usually about 4. 4, that's it. Uranus takes about 8 years to go through a sign. We're talking 4 conjunctions, maybe 5, usually about 4 because of how Mars's transit works out. This will be the first time we have the opposition. Now, the opposition number can kind of range differently based off of retrogrades, but this brings new disruption, unexpected disruption, a staggering shift in information, and it is going to trigger an insecurity of something being pulled back. Now, why do I say that? Mars is going to enter Sagittarius and start that opposition to Uranus on the 4th. By the time we get to the 7th, Uranus will leave Gemini and go back into Taurus and trigger a whole other round of unfinished business. We'll get to that here in a second. But this is Uranus days away from leaving a sign. The arrival, the disruption, the action, the influence of action is going to create disruption that can be so hard for some people that they withdraw from a connection, from a commitment. They do not continue working with something or someone. And the withdrawal that starts to get triggered between the 4th and the 7th impacts more than one area of the sky. And I want to be clear, we get to the 4th, there's going to be tension. There is going to be fighting. There's going to be things that just kind of hit the air unexpectedly this day. Didn't even know this was going to be an issue. Didn't even know this was going to be a problem. Didn't even know that this was a soft spot for certain people. But there's going to be a need to fight something out. There's going to be a disruption that comes through. And the result of the disruption will result in a lot of people pulling back, breaking away, not continuing to work in the same place, do something the same way. A lot of people are going to be forced to go back to the drawing board in ways that they're not even anticipating. So be aware of that. Very intense energy for a lot of people. Okay. Mars will go through the opposition to Uranus. Now, again, Mars is going to enter at 7:02 a.m. Central Standard Time. The opposition with Uranus is going to happen roughly around 11:30. And then right afterwards, we're going to get to the next morning on the 5th. So I'm just going to bump this by day. We get to the full moon in Taurus. So the full moon is actually going to perfect at 7:18 a.m. Central Standard Time. 7:30, it's close enough. It's fine. Here's that full moon in Taurus. while Mars is still in that opposition to Uranus. This is a huge energy. Now, the other thing again, Uranus is about to retrograde back into Taurus. Full moons have to do with completions. In addition to that, Venus. Two things with Venus here. One, Venus rules Taurus. Venus rules where that full moon is. Number two, where Venus is during the full moon in Taurus is where the new moon in Libra occurred 2 weeks ago. Yeah. That little new moon in Libra that was like right around October 20th, 21st time frame, whenever we had the first Mercury Mars conjunction, that new moon that was solidifying some of the other intentions in the transits. Venus is at the point of the sky where the new moon in Libra happened. Again, bringing results, bringing solutions, bringing outcomes to things that have been going on over the last few weeks. For some people, that's going to go well. For other people, full moons are completions. And there can be something again in these few days that trigger somebody pulling back, somebody not continuing, somebody losing their patience, things not necessarily going correct, and a messiness in the vibration. I feel like whatever triggers the messiness, we learn about it very quickly at the beginning of November. Intentions are high, egos are kind of high, there's inflation in the air. I mean that in the internal sense, but there's also inflation going on in our prices and stuff like that. So it's inflated vibration, and there feels like we have some bubble popping of how certain things can't continue. And this kind of feeds into part of that. Now, we're going to keep this going. On the 6th, Mars is going to go through a sextile to Pluto. That's not necessarily like the hugest issue, but there can be, again, an action of something that we need to take to transform, overcome, some type of news, some type of acknowledgement. Like that we're setting the intention of something, of an action that needs to be taken. Not all of us are necessarily ready to take that action, and we are still in the full moon energy. I feel like Mars's sextile to Pluto is not going to be as large for people as what happens later in the day on the 6th. And that is going to be whenever Venus enters Scorpio. And I feel like that is going to what a lot more people are going to feel. Now, that's going to happen exactly at 4:40 p.m. I got it now at 5:30. And Venus enters Scorpio. Now, I want to be absolutely clear about something. I should have put part of this in the intro, but I'm going to put it right here. Venus rules your mouth, everything through your throat, into your lungs. Venus also rules the kidneys and certain sexual organs, just putting it in that perspective. Venus in her detriment is going to impact people's health. First and foremost, I want to be clear about that. Once Mercury turns retrograde, which we're a couple of days from it right here, and Mercury is the other ruler of the lungs. One of the other things that can be a setback or a messiness that we start to deal with in November is an influx of like respiratory issues, respiratory infections, anything tied to breathing, the cold, the flu. Now, is that a cliche thing to say because it's wintertime? Absolutely. I know that. However, I have seen other Mercury retrogrades that include Venus in Scorpio and seen an influx of like suddenly everybody had the flu, everybody had a cold. All you had to do was step outside. You didn't even have to touch another person, and germs, like it's just a wave that hits. And I feel like that's going to be another part of the messiness in November, is that some things are not going to necessarily go to plan, or some of us are going to have something that energetically pushes us back, so to speak, pushes us down, keeps us in one spot, because whatever needs to play out isn't meant to deal with us. So something slows us down bodily. And that's one thing I want to bring up once Venus is now in Scorpio, which is going to be the majority of the month now. And big and there, Mercury is about to go retrograde. So as we go into the weekly stuff, I will be doing extra warnings towards people's health. But again, Venus is now in her detriment. Venus is going into Scorpio. All the hidden vibrations, the hidden wounds, the hidden trauma. And as soon as Venus goes into Sagittarius, what does she do? She starts a square with Pluto while Uranus, here we go, is retrograding back into Taurus. Now, this is going to be more exact on the 7th, so I'm going to just bump this by day. Uranus will retrograde back into Taurus at 8:20 p.m., and Venus's exact square to Pluto is going to be roughly around 10 p.m. So I'm just going to bump this a few hours, get to there, 10:30. Here's Venus, 1 degree, 33 minutes. Here's Pluto, 1 degree, 31. But here is Uranus retrograding back into Taurus. The outcome, the solution, whatever Venus has been bringing up, that has suddenly been brought to the surface is going to trigger an insecurity with Venus's square to Pluto. Now, the thing is, Venus is in the higher authority. This is a necessary thing that needs to change. This is a necessary wound that needs to be revealed. This is a necessary trigger of some sort for many, many people. And it coincides with Uranus, the modern ruler of Aquarius, Pluto's in Aquarius, with Uranus retrograding back into Taurus, which is Venus's sign. And there's another wave of unfinished business that is being activated with Uranus going back into Taurus. Now, Uranus is going to be here until late April. So we have a little bit of time before we're fully aware we can fully work through whatever Uranus's unfinished business in. So we're not going to get fully developed into what this is quite yet. I feel like we're going to become far more aware as we get into the first of next year, and then we'll start to put some things into a different order into the first of next year. So there will be awareness of this coming later on, but the first little inkling, the depth of whatever the trigger is, comes through right here. And there is some kind of wave, there's some kind of insecurity that is going to be very, very shaky for a lot of people. And it is going to instigate a lot of turns in people, because that's what's going to follow this transit. Now let's get into the turns and why I'm saying that. Now, on November 9th, bumping this by 2 days, Mercury is going to go retrograde. Now, Mercury is going retrograde in Jupiter's sign. Jupiter is also stationing. There is a turn in a decision, Mercury turning retrograde, a turn in information, Mercury turning retrograde, that is going to create disruption, tension, fighting. If it's not fighting, sorry, I had to catch a drink. If it's not fighting, then again, it's the loss of support. It's feeling like something needs to withdraw. And I feel like for some people, one kind of withdrawal can have like this triggered effect of like, we don't get this done. If this doesn't happen, they pull out. Something else goes wrong over here, and this goes wrong over here. It then impacts all of this. And there's something about the turn of insecurities, the turn in information. And I really feel like there's going to be something that triggers a lot of insecurity that forces that turn in behavior, forces that shift in opinion, forces that shift in the vibration. And the turns, like turntables, turning around, a whole different way of viewing something happens somewhere between like November 9th when Mercury turns retrograde and November 12th when Jupiter goes retrograde. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. So again, November 9th, Mercury retrograde, bump this now to the 12th, Jupiter goes retrograde. The thing about also with Jupiter turning retrograde is this is going to coincide with the second Mercury-Mars conjunction. Now, this is actually going to go exact a little bit more around 5 p.m. So I'm a couple hours past it right here at 10:30. But I feel like, again, the change of opinion, the turn in a situation, feeling like something has withdrawn, knowing the fact that Uranus will retrograde out of Gemini, which is Mercury's sign, that feels like the withdrawal that triggers a change of opinion, a change of plans, a change of something with Mercury turning retrograde, a shift in information, a shift in money, a shift in travel, a shift in the plan, a shift in the documents, a shift in the agreements. Mercury turns retrograde. By the time we get to the Mercury Mars conjunction, now again, remember, there are 5 Mercury Mars conjunctions. And whenever Mercury went into shadow, roughly around October 20th, because I was beaten up that week a lot in that particular transit. So that November 20th timeframe, whenever Mercury Mars had their conjunction, that was also Mercury going into shadow. As soon as Mercury turns retrograde, we get another Mercury Mars conjunction. So whatever is going on right here around November 12th can also go back to the things that we agreed to and committed to and thought that we would be doing the week of October 20th. Be aware of that. There's a very intense week that I was talking about in October. It is feeding into this right here. But again, some of the things that we thought we would commit to, not working out quite the same. Something has shifted our opinion. Something has shifted the way that we see things, think about things, and it is going to have, for some people, a trickle effect of how it's going to impact people, or it's because this opinion has changed, a whole other support has changed. You couldn't make that work. You told me you had it. You're coming back to me saying that you don't have it. That's not what we agreed to, because we're not sticking to our agreements. I can't work with you anymore. I can't continue to do stuff with you. I don't trust you. I don't like you. I don't like this. I don't like the way it makes me feel. There's a lot of tension and frustration in this week of just things not going to plan, people not sticking to their word. And that Mercury Mars conjunction, that's a lot of not sticking to our word. That's a lot of things having a major shift that we were not anticipating, that we were not aware of. Have fun. So there's that. Oh, that vibration between the 9th and the 12th is so intense. And it is directly feeding off of all of the last few weeks that bring into it. And I really feel like a lot of people, again, with that Uranus reentry into Taurus, that feels like a removal of something. That feels like somebody backing out of something. That feels like something not continuing in some way. And it turns into this trickle, rippled effect of shit not going to plan. Oh, necessary messy. Just remember that. November is messy, but for so many of us, it's a necessary messy. Okay. Now we're going to get into the 16th. And Jupiter is going to have a trine with the sun. So we're actually pretty close to it being exact. It goes exact roughly around 11 p.m. Central Standard Time. I got it at 10:30. But here's Jupiter, 25 degrees, 6 minutes. Here is the sun, 25 degrees, 4 minutes. Now, this is water to water. This is kind of activating parts of like a grand trine energy, because not only does Jupiter trine the sun real late on the 16th, but as we go into the 17th, roughly around 3 a.m., so it's only like 4 hours apart, the sun will also be in its exact trine with Saturn. So there's this very interesting energy that's playing out between the end of the 16th and early on the 17th. So this is going to be like this attempt for some kind of diplomatic situation. But it feels like one person's willing to agree, Sun trine Saturn, but another person doesn't like what's happening and will not completely commit. If that other person's involved, I don't want to work with them ever again. And there's something in this grand trine energy that feels like it's emotional upset. Now, all in all, grand trine should be something that's very healing and magical, especially with Jupiter involved. But Jupiter just turned retrograde. We're not ready yet. We're becoming ready. We're becoming aware that something can't continue, that certain people will not continue. They're not going to support us. We don't support certain people, depending on the situation. We don't believe that they're going to be responsible. We don't believe that they're going to take care of something, or we don't care that they're going to take care of something. Fine, do it with them. Go over there. Go back to your ex. I don't care. I don't want anything to do with any of y'all anymore. Jupiter turning retrograde. Jupiter's the doctor, the guru, the teacher. Health, masses of people, wealth, and abundance. There's something about people in this vibration, now more in the, big picture, socioeconomical sense. There's something about how the masses no longer believe or support people in positions of power, the people that are supposed to be responsible for things, to do the right things. They'll accept something, they'll do something, but what they are doing might not be in the best interest of everyone. And if it's not going to be something that is right for the masses, then we're going to have this wave of insecurity that is going to force additional changes, especially with people in positions of power throughout the rest of the Mercury retrograde. The awareness of wounds, emotions, what's necessary to heal, the things that have been going on underneath the surface, of putting some things back into order. And the thing about where Saturn is in the sky at this 25-degree mark, this is where he was back during the messiness in that March, April timeframe, was right here in this area of the sky. During that eclipse season, that Venus retrograde, that Mercury retrograde, this area of the sky directly feeds back from that time frame for a lot of people. And I know in the big picture sense that a lot of people, if you think about it, you can objectively look back and be able to figure out, yeah, that's when the tariffs started. That's when certain things started to go down. And we need a certain type of inflection and shift between people to finally get something fixed, overcome, cured, work through. And there's a lot of emotional understanding that needs to be involved right here, but not everybody is going to see eye to eye. And I want to be clear about that. We're going to see that in the big picture sense just as much as the micro individual sense. Okay. Getting back into the charts. Now, again, the 16th, we're going to get the start of Jupiter's trine with the sun. By the time we get into the overnight hours of the 17th, we're going to get into the actual trine with Saturn. So we're a little bit closer to it right here. But the other thing that we're getting on the 17th, it's going to be more in the afternoon, is Mercury is going to reactivate all of the things that he started to do in shadow. Now, this is going to go exact roughly around 2:30 p.m. And that is where Mercury is going to re-enter its sextile from Pluto. Now, whenever it comes to the Mercury retrograde, there was a series of firsts that started to happen in late October. The first conjunction with Mercury and Mars. We had a trine with Jupiter. We had a trine with Saturn. We had the opposition with Uranus. We had the trine with Neptune, not in this order. And we had this sextile with Pluto. The sextile with Pluto was the last one before. Now it's going to be the first one in this series of firsts. And there again can be things that directly tie back to the stuff that we were doing in late October and getting a fresh perspective as to some of the changes or some of the things that we thought were going to go one way. And now we're realizing they're not going to go that way. Now, the thing about this time frame is the amount of awareness with the sun, Saturn, sun, Jupiter. What's been said by the doctor, the guru, the teacher? What's the right thing to do in regards to our responsibility? And for some people, there's going to be a withdrawal. Mercury sextile to Pluto here adds an extra layer to what we've already talked about with the 16th, 17th time frame. There needs to be a shift backwards towards something of, I don't have something the same way. I can't continue this the same way. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I don't know where we're going to get the money for this. I don't know how we're going to fix this. I need time to figure it out. This wasn't what I was planning. This is what I thought was going to happen. This isn't what I was anticipating. And there's something about previous understandings, lessons, anticipation now coming back through where, again, something's not working correctly. Something's not going to plan. And something, again, speaks to not having the same level of support or belief based off of previous engagements, previous conversations, previous commitments, previous meetings. So be aware of that. Okay. Oh, on the 18th, roughly around 9 8:20 p.m., bump this by a day, in the evening time, Mercury is going to re-enter Scorpio. And once Mercury re-enters Scorpio, it's got a whole mess of stuff that's going to start to happen. Specifically, right after midnight, going into the morning hours of the 19th. So I'm going to just keep this bumping this by hour. We're getting into the morning time of the 19th. And again, Mercury re-entering Scorpio, taking us back to a prior conversation, taking us back to a prior agreement, a prior mindset, something that we thought we had already dealt with. And now we need to rethink, revise, remove, redo. Now Mercury is back in Scorpio. And again, Mercury has that co-rulership of the lungs. So be aware of the stuff of the things whenever it's tied to health that I already kind of warned about once Venus went into Scorpio. But I feel like we need to put extra emphasis on it now because we can have, again, things tied to the respiratory, things tied to the body, fluids on the body, feeling really stiff, feeling like things aren't flowing, feeling like we're not getting a lot of things worked out physically. But in addition to that, Mercury is going to hit this opposition to Uranus. And again, it can be tied to the previous Mercury-Uranus opposition, but this is different. The first Mercury-Uranus opposition, Uranus was still in Gemini. That's something that we were dealing with roughly around October 29th. Sorry, I was doing that part from memory. Wait, did I write it down? I think I did. Because that would be the smart thing. The 20th, the 30th time. Yeah, the 29th, 30th time frame. We had that first Mercury-Uranus opposition. However, they were in different signs. Uranus, having retrograded back into Taurus, tells us there's something about an old lesson and an old wound and an old situation, unfinished business, now that Uranus is back in Taurus. But the other thing about what we're at right now is Venus is in Scorpio. So Venus and Mercury are in the same sign. There's something about the hidden energy being brought to the surface unexpectedly. Old hidden situations, old hidden wounds, old hidden desires coming out unexpectedly and having a wave of confusion of not seeing something clearly because there's also that trine with Neptune. And for a lot of people, this feels like a test. Like once Mercury goes back into Scorpio, this really feels like a test. And sometimes you're going to have an old person come back around unexpectedly, hit your DMs, suddenly call in your phone, something coming back through. I'm thinking everything communication, so you get something in the mail, some kind of email, some kind of text, some kind of phone call, some kind of DM, something over your Discord server, something like that. You get something coming through, an arrival of something coming back around, but it's bringing up an old wound, an old pattern, an old insecurity to make sure that we are going to finally learn the lesson and do something differently because Mercury is retrograde. Now that trine with Neptune, there can be symptoms tied to that if we're dealing with the health stuff. Lies, fraud, deception, because it's Neptune, but it can also be certain like spiritual lessons, beliefs, hopes, ideas. And for some people, again, the old stuff, the old pattern that we don't see clearly can feed into this. And if you would normally respond a certain way when somebody comes around, I'm saying there's some necessity in some ways to do the opposite. Now, if this is like a family member that you have been no contact with, I'm not saying you have to break no contact. I'm not saying you have to let anybody back in. But if you need to hear what they say, it's okay to listen. You do not have to let anybody back in. Most people trying to come back around are trying to resolve something from the past because it's a part of their final lessons too. So there's that. Oh, the energy as we get into this vibration. Again, Mercury hitting that opposition to Uranus, that trine with Neptune. This is the most exact between 5:30 and 6:30 a.m. on November 19th. And then we get into the 20th and we get this new moon in Scorpio, which is also a Mercury cazimi on the same day. So new moon is going to perfect like right after midnight. So 12:47 a.m. Central Standard Time. And at 3:27 a.m., we're also going to get this Mercury conjunct the sun. So some of the things coming back around solidify some kind of new awareness, again, of something that we need to handle. This Mercury cazimi is opposite that Neptune. It is in a trine to, I'm sorry, opposite that Uranus and in a trine to Neptune. There's a reason something came back around. There's a reason someone come back around. And it is meant to help with some kind of deep-seated wound, deep-seated vibration, because this is also that new moon in Scorpio. Now, this is a new moon in a fixed sign. We need to close out some kind of chapter. Now, in this vibration, does this feel like a closeout? No, but it can be the first steps towards a closeout. Be aware of that, of unfinished business, the first real awareness of what that pattern is going to be with whatever Uranus and Taurus is representing for us and its vibration coming back. Anytime Mercury goes into a conjunction with the sun, there is a level of clarity. There is an arrival. There is news. There is something that becomes very clear and comes to light. We are meant to have some kind of clarity. And again, this is in a new moon. So the intensity of what we need to focus on, what we need to reveal, what we need to work through will solidify something very deep inside for so many people. It is going to solidify that the stuff that's been going on below the surface can finally get worked through and talked about in so many ways. This can be either a incredibly revealing new moon of all of the lies, fraud, deception, secrets coming to the surface, or this can be a very enlightening new moon of like finally being able to talk through our shit and our trauma because of all the triggers that have brought something forward. And it's like, because we finally worked through the wound, we can work through something else that we haven't been able to work through in a very long time. This is a very intense new moon for so many people. Oh, and not only that, that's not the only thing going on this day. Neptune and Uranus go back into their exact sextile, and this is their second one. Now, we've had one of these before. This goes all the way back to, oh, I wrote the wrong dates down. I just noticed that. No, I didn't. Wrong. I'm looking at the wrong line. The first one goes back to August 28th. Now, August 28th was Uranus sextile Neptune, but between Aries and Gemini. Neptune was retrograde, Uranus was direct, and it was right as we were starting to go into eclipse season. There was some kind of spontaneous, exciting, inspiring energy letting us know stuff that we want to get into later. It kind of fed into the itch of something that we want to do later, but we weren't completely ready for. So we got a glimpse of something. Now the second sextile between Uranus and Neptune has retrograded back into previous signs. Before we can tap into the glimpse that we saw, the potential of what we saw, we have stuff from the past that needs to finally get worked through, that needs to finally get released. The third and final sextile between Uranus and Neptune will be in next year, specifically in July. July's got a lot of shit to it next year. Fair warning. But this has one extra transit and one extra layer that tells me that a lot of what we need to work through right now, a lot of what we're going to be dealing with, has a long-term effect. It feeds into the new normal. It feeds into a lot of the new that's going to come through next year. It feeds into the lessons. It feeds into the process. It feeds into the procedure. It feeds into the direction, the path, the decisions that will be encompassing the long-term new normal in 2026. There's recovery, there's healing, there's inspiration, there's understanding old wounds and old patterns and doing something different so we can finally get through our healing process. Let's keep this going. Okay, now I'm done beating up the new moon. Again, Neptune with Uranus. We got that sextile going on. I don't know why I can't keep my place today. I'm very sorry, guys. On the 21st, that is when the sun will hit its full opposition to Uranus. So here's the sun, 29 degrees, 16 minutes. Here's that opposition to Uranus. As soon as the sun goes into an opposition to Uranus, it is also in this trine with Neptune. This is actually going to go more exact right around sunrise. So between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m., the whole timeline. So I feel like a lot of people, when we wake up on the 21st, we feel like we're ready to be done with something. We feel like we're ready to make a change. We're feeling like we're ready to take some kind of action of what we want to do moving forward, what we want to transition into. This feels so enlightening and very, very necessary. As the day continues, roughly around 7:30 p.m. in the evening time. I'm not bumping this by hour. I'm just going to bump it by day. The sun is going to go into Sagittarius. And now we're going into more planets in Jupiter's signs. More awareness of where we want to shift our focus, of how we want to do something differently, of where we need to do certain things in our healing process. The other thing that's going to happen on the 22nd is after the sun goes into Sag, Mercury is going to re-enter its trine with Saturn. The previous one was October 25th. And it will re-enter its trine with Jupiter. That was previously on October 24th. So there can be things regarding like a shift in our opinion, a shift in responsibility, a shift in our healing, a shift in our desires, where we're going to make a change, where we're not going to continue to do something the same. Because what's really interesting about this grand trine is all the planets are retrograde. What does that tell me? Nothing's going to plan. Not a damn thing. And nobody wants to take responsibility for it. This is going to be a weird, intense energy. It's going to bring certain things to light. The one thing about anytime a planet changes signs, and right now the sun went back in, I'm sorry, not back, like it retrograded. Sorry. The sun moved into Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's sign. The thing about the end of the Mercury retrograde is it ends right around the time that Saturn ends its retrograde. So we started the Mercury retrograde with Jupiter going retrograde simultaneously. Not the same hour, but within the same few days. We had one turn. And some of us, we had a very specific reaction based off the turn and the vibration. There will be some elements of like, I'm trying to get something fixed. I'm trying to get something to change. Well, I can't do anything until they do something. I can't go anywhere until they go somewhere. I don't know what's going on. There's so much around November 22nd of just things just not going to plan, of things not working the way that we thought, and not necessarily knowing exactly how to get someone to understand, to appease in the changes, to appeal to them. There's so much going wrong. And it also feels like, oh, how do I want to say this next part? One hand doesn't know what the other one's doing. We're doing stuff over here, this one doing something over here. And the cognitive center of what would keep us going doesn't work correctly. So the head is not connected to the hands. And each of the hands is like they have a mind of their own. This does not feel like things are going to go well for a lot of people. I do not like this time frame for travel for a lot of people. I want to be clear about that. And I also feel like there's going to be something where nobody wants to take an action. Nobody wants to do anything. Nobody wants to take responsibility. And it feels like the hugest like stalemate of like the Spider-Mans, all the Spider-Mans pointing at each other like this. You do it. No. That's what this feels like. That's what. But it also feels like there's an arrival with the sun going into Sagittarius and going into Jupiter's sign, bringing forth an awareness as to what can be brought to the table, what we can do to make changes. It might not happen all in the same time frame or the same day. What I think is interesting is once we go through this Mexican standoff, sorry, that I don't know how else to call it, the Spider-Man standoff is what I really need to be saying. We get into the 23rd, and the sun is going to hit a sextile to Pluto. We're trying to create a solution. We're trying to put something down. We're trying to put something to plan. But there's so much of this energy that's like, everything is a long time coming. Everything that's been going on below the surface, behind the scenes, we've pushed too many buttons. And it is going to force people to change their mind. It is going to force people to change a decision. And the sun hitting the sextile to Pluto of like, what does it take to overcome the power struggle? Because in this moment, Pluto is one of the very few planets that's not retrograde. Like, he's over the trauma, he's over the crap. And there's some kind of reflection in this energy, just as much as there's this no accountability, no help, no aid, no support. I'm not going to continue this. You got to do something differently. They got to take responsibility. It's their fault, anyways. And Mercury going backwards is just trying to make certain revisions, make certain adaptations, try to get a lot of things put together, but he can't get things put together because he is also retrograde. This is going to be a hellacious week for travel. I swear it's not going to go to plan. If we are trying to fly somewhere, it is definitely not going to go to plan. Oh, Thanksgiving is messy, and we're getting closer to, at least for us here in America, to our Thanksgiving. And this is going to be a messy ass week. I just want to be clear about that. Now, on the 24th, we might get a little bit more of a change. Now, this is going to go more exact in the evening time. So I want to just get these two a little bit closer. That'll work. Okay. So Venus and Mercury are going to hit a conjunction. They're going to go more exact around 8 p.m. But what's interesting is that this is the first in the series of 3. Now, we have this other pattern going on of 5 conjunctions between Mercury and Mars. I've already talked about this. What's interesting is this conjunction of Mercury and Venus, it's really close. It's not the exact degree, but it is in a similar area of the sky where we previously had our first Mercury-Mars conjunction. And again, I do feel like Venus has been bringing solutions. She's bringing results. She's bringing aid. She's bringing something that's meant to give more help and kindly finally get something settled, get something put into order, get something shifted around to confirm a change in the plans, to ensure a shift is necessary. What I love about this Venus-Mercury conjunction is Mercury starts to slow down after this. There's something that feels like a shock wave of like, we're going to get something turned around. I'm not going to be worried about what everybody else is doing. I'm going to worry about what I can put correct, what I can put into focus. And Venus gives some level of support as to this is the change that I need to do. Whether it's in appearances, whether it's in food, whether it's in taste, whether it's in our love life and in our relationships, like this is what I have to focus on. This is what I have to change. Venus's conjunction to Mercury. Now, again, this is the first one. The next one is going to happen January 29th. The third and final one will happen February 27th. Now, what's interesting is the first and the third of her conjunctions, Mercury will be retrograde. The second one will be the direct one. This brings forth the first round of where we need to make adaptations, where we need to make emotional changes, where we need to let go of certain insecurities, how letting go of these insecurities can bring some level of solution for us. Because again, so much of our vibration is we're trying to make necessary changes, make certain decisions that ensure which path we're going to go down. Because so much of 2026 is getting into a new normal. But so many of us were not ready for the new normal. And November has been messy. This part does not feel as messy. So I want to be clear about that. I want to be clear. It's not as messy. All right. Venus's conjunction to Mercury. Now, again, Mercury is going to start to slow down after this conjunction. Once we get to the 26th, bumping this a couple days later, Venus will enter the trine with Jupiter and the trine with Saturn. Now, this is going to go the most exact on the 26th. So again, where a few days before, it didn't feel like anything could happen correctly, like the 22nd, Nobody wanted to get anything going. Nobody got anything to plan. Nothing was happening correctly. Some people, the only way we're going to find a solution is by not giving a crap about what everybody else is doing. We need to only worry about what we can focus on. If between the 22nd and the 26th, you can see this here, so it's 4 days, we don't focus on everybody else's drama. We focus on where we can find our solutions and take that forward. When Venus comes into play, we have the ability to turn something around. We have the ability to unstick something. Even if you've still lost support in one direction, because Jupiter's retrograde is new, somebody else is willing to turn something around. Somebody else is willing to take a different kind of accountability. Somebody else is willing to shift their responsibility. Why do I say that? Because after the Venus trine with Saturn, by the time we get into the 27th, this is going to happen later in the evening, so I'm going to bump this to about 10:30. Saturn will end its retrograde. Venus's solution gets something with the elder, some kind of shift in responsibility, some kind of shift in regards to who we have previously cared for, where we have been stagnant and stubborn about something. Venus unsticks the vibration. It unsticks the situation. It unsticks the pattern. Venus brings something here. And we get somebody willing to give, something willing to change. We have some kind of turn with the elder. We have some kind of turn with the boss. We have some kind of shift in responsibility. We finally turn something around. And Saturn goes direct. Now, 2 days later, on the 29th, bump, bump, Mercury will also turn direct. So again, we started the Mercury retrograde with another planet going retrograde simultaneously. We end the Mercury retrograde with another planet ending its retrograde simultaneously. And for a lot of people, the divide is we're not going to do something the way that we thought we were doing it. We're going to have to shift our plan. We're going to have to shift our focus. We're going to have to turn something around. We're going to have to lean into someone else in their level of responsibility, in their level of authority. There's not going to be something that continues the same way by the time we get to the end of November. And Mercury's retrograde is going to settle and finally turn something around and allow for us to refocus on any of the deep-seated wounds and insecurity one last time, but also more with the inclination that we're trying to turn something around in more of a healing aspect, in a solution-oriented aspect, but also in an aspect towards going down the new path. There's direction, there's decisions, there's a balancing. Where are we going? Which way do we go? Which way do we go? Which way do we go? Okay, moving along. Oh, now we're going to continue this. Once Mercury ends its retrograde, the other thing that we get is this opposition between Venus and Uranus. And I kind of like this. I'm not going to lie. Like Venus goes to this opposition to Uranus. Whenever we get into the 30th, she'll also be completely in her trine with Neptune, but it's really active here anyways. And her solution can also be something that brings additional awareness of the past, of a belief system, of the symptoms towards something, something that needs to come to an end, something that needs to a close, something that we no longer need to repeat. But what's interesting about Venus hitting that opposition to Uranus is this will be the final opposition of them while Uranus is in Venus's sign. The next few times that this happens, Uranus will be in Gemini. It'd be in a whole different sign, a whole different vibration, a whole different mentality. So this feels like we're facing something, we're doing something for the last time in a lot of ways. And that coincides with Mercury ending its retrograde. It's okay to know that we're going to deal with something for the last time. You're not going to accept a lie for the last time. You're not going to answer that DM anymore. You're not going to let somebody trigger you anymore. There is a necessity to the messy of November. And I feel like Venus coming into this vibration is showing us something very, very unanticipated, but appreciative in a lot of ways. It's solution oriented. And again, it leads into something else shifting into focus, because what does Venus do after the opposition to Uranus and the trine to Neptune? By the time we get into the afternoon of the 30th, Venus will be completely in Sagittarius. And again, we have another planet in Jupiter's signs. I kind of hinted at this at the very beginning of the episode. There's something about what we're doing next that completely starts to emphasize where we're meant to have gains. But before we can have the gains, we got to clean house. We got to quit doing some of the things the way that we have been. We got to make changes. We got to make choices. We got to reflect and own why we behaved in certain ways. It's a trauma response. I got to stay busy all the time. I got to be productive. It's the only way I feel like a person. You have to deal with the trauma response. I reject. I don't want to be in a relationship. Stay away from me. Hell, I do that myself. Like, I don't need. Stay away. There's a reflectiveness. There's a need to know why. There's something in this vibration that speaks to getting a better psychological understanding as to why we have done certain things certain ways in the past, and how we're going to change them moving forward, and how we're going to do something different moving forward, how we're going to heal something. We start this month with Jupiter turning retrograde simultaneous to Mercury. Mercury rules our logical brain, but Jupiter, it rules our liver, which would arguably be the heart of the stomach. It filters us through so much. It helps us heal through so much. It has a direct impact to our brain. These are connected in so many ways. Jupiter heals. It holds a lot of trauma. It filters everything through our body. Whenever it comes to our food and the things that we intake, it's a filtration system. It's quite literally the biggest part of healing our body, but it's also a big part of healing our trauma. We store a lot of trauma in our hips. Hips are also ruled by Jupiter. We store a lot of trauma in our liver. We need to do the things where we defunk, that we unlock, thinking unlocking of the hips. We need to shake a booty, cleanse that liver. We need to cleanse things. I feel like by the time we get to the end of November, we are in a far better place of taking actions to heal things. And that action is going to require transition. Now, I'm going to remind everybody, whenever it comes to the Pisces side of the eclipse axis, we are not getting new moons. We're only getting full moons. Our first full moon happened before the nodes even changed signs, and that was back in September of 2024. The Pisces eclipse that we had in September of this year was one that activated an aligning energy that would take a year to fully incorporate, to fully connect to. And since we've had that Pisces eclipse, we have not had a whole lot going into the Jupiterian signs until the end of October, and we're going into November. There is a messiness to heal. It's a necessary messy. It's a necessary cleanse. It's a necessary cleaning. It's a necessary vibration. There is a test. For a lot of people, the test is going to force decisions, force choices, force direction. And by the end of it, for some people, it's even going to force a connection. Force might be a hard word to say on connection. Might be a little rough, but it's going to force something. And while we get into all of those Jupiter transits, what I'm talking about is by the end of the month, we're going to have Mars in Sag, Sun in Sag, Venus in Sag. Saturn will turn direct in Pisces. And whenever we get into December, Neptune will turn direct in Pisces. The other thing that will happen in December is Mercury will go into Sag. The awareness of transition by the end of November will be very overwhelming, that we have to make changes and take action That's best for everyone because Jupiter rules the masses. That's best for our healing process because, again, Jupiter is the doctor, the guru, the teacher. It is best for the lessons that we need to learn, doctor, guru, teacher, and the responsibilities that we commit to going into 2026, because the responsibilities are definitely going to shift in the new year. But before we can commit to the transition, we have to deal with the mess in the closet, the mess in the kitchen, the mess in your heart, your car, the wounds that are underneath, and how that is holding us back. There's a need and a necessity in doing the opposite, in breaking the pattern so we can finally heal. If you know what that pattern is, great. That's great if you've already figured it out. And whenever some of the messiness starts to hit with other people, what I'm going to say is be supportive and be objective. Let some things play out. Do not try to insert yourself in situations, especially if you normally would. Do not try to control the outcome. Be objective and let some things happen naturally. Understand the transition is necessary. The changes are necessary. They're best for everyone in some way, shape, or form. Anytime something goes wrong in work, a lot of times it's shifting us into a different direction, into a different path, into a whole different career for some people, a whole different field, into the whole different chapter of their life. Sometimes we think back reflectively of like, that had to crash so I could be here. And if you're watching the crashes in November, just remember that this is a necessary messy. Why can't I talk? Stupid Mercury and Sagittarius. I can't talk for nothing. It's a necessary messy. It's a necessary vibration. It's how we cleanse. It's how we fix. It's how we heal. November is a test. November is a necessary messy to ensure that we are prepared, that we will make the different decisions, that we will do the different things going into 2026. It is to ensure that we are prepared for the new normal that we commit to going into next year. November is a necessary messy to force choices, to force understanding, a new way of thinking, to allow different paths to illuminate and allow people to take the directions they need to take moving forward. So there's that. Okay. I love and appreciate every single one of you. I will talk to everybody very, very soon. Subscribe.